Hi, and welcome to the third video in our file monitoring series. So in our last video, we actually converted our basic script that we made in the first video, and we've created three functions. So we have those three functions right here. So we have the add file to baseline, we have the verify baseline, we also have the create baseline. Now, the only thing that we had noticed was that when we add a file to the baseline, and if the file already exists, it'll keep adding multiple copies. So if we take a look at this example here in baselines 1.csv, we already have one entry for test1 and one entry for test2.txt. And we can actually go ahead and keep adding more entries of test2 here. Give me one moment. Just run the entire code here. We run this code, we will see that the entry did get added in. So we have the test2.txt as a second entry with the same hash. But if I go ahead and change text2 and once again just execute that code, now we have test2 with a different hash. So now we have two hashes for test2. We don't actually want this. We want to make sure that test2 doesn't actually change or anything. We want to make sure that if we see a change that we can actually say that it's actually changed. But if we have two different copies of it, it becomes very difficult to have reliable stats or reliable data. So we want to make sure that we only have one entry for a file. And if we want, if this file is already in the baseline and we want to say that we want to add it again, maybe we do actually want to overwrite the document, or maybe we just forgot that we put it in there. So we should get a prompt if we want to overwrite it or not. So that's what we're going to be creating today. So we're going to be leaving off right exactly from the video 2 here. So let me just create a copy of our last code, and we are going to start working on that here. So I'm just going to name it video 3 here. And let's get started. So we already know that the changes are going to happen in the add file to baseline commandlet that we've created. And let's get started. So what we would like to first do is kind of check the baseline file and make sure if the target path is there or not. So what we would actually first do here is if we come into our statement here in our try statement. So this is once again in the add file to baseline. After we checked that the baseline and the target file actually exist, now we're going to be starting our work here. So we're going to create a variable here, and we're going to call it current baseline. And we're going to make that equal to import-csv on the path of our baseline file path. Once again, we're always just going to specify the delimiter of comma. Just even though that is the default setting, if someone goes and looks at our code, at least they'll know that we're expecting a comma here. So we have our current baseline. Now this will actually import all of our paths and our hashes. So now what we have to do is we have to check if the target file path is in that current baseline. So if we actually just run this code here and we see what's in here, we will see that we have our path and our hashes. So let's go ahead and let's do an if target path is in current baseline. And let's just do a simple write output here. Let's see if this works. File path detected already in baseline file. We're still going to be adding it because we still have this code at the bottom. But let's see what happens in this scenario where if it'll actually tell us that it detected the file. And it has not. Now, the reason for that is actually because you might think that, well, it is in the current baselines, but this will be checking an object to see if that object specifically is in the current baseline, and that is actually not true. What we would actually have to do is if the target file path is in the current baseline dot path, and that will actually just specify the paths for the current baseline, and it will actually be able to find the target path in there. So if we actually run this now, we will see that file path detected already in baseline file. So now we know that our code for our if statement is working. We can actually detect if that file is there. So now what we need to do is we need to give a prompt to the user to say, do you want to overwrite this file? But what we can also actually already do is if the target path is not in the current baseline, we already know what we want to do. And we just want to cut this code out and put it in here. We want to add that path directly into the file without doing anything else because there's no entry. So we're not worried about overwriting a duplicate or inserting a duplicate record in there. So in our if statement here, what we need to do is we need to first prompt the user. So what we need to do is we need to do a variable here. I'm going to call it overwrite. So this is going to store if we're going to overwrite it or not. And we're going to do a read host because that we're getting an input from the user here. And we are going to go ahead and we're going to put a prompt. And we are going to do a path exists already in the baseline file, comma, would you like to overwrite it? And then we're just going to put a capital Y slash capital N. And we are just going to do that. And we're just going to put them in square brackets. I think that kind of just looks a little bit nicer. It kind of gives the user a little bit more of an idea of what we're expecting here. So once we have this overwrite, what we need to do is we need to figure out what the user actually put in. So we need to make sure if they've put in a Y, if they've put in a N. What I also like to do is I also like the ability to just write yes or no. So I actually check for both of those. And if they don't write a Y, yes, or N, no, if they put something else in, we need to let them know that they've put in an incorrect entry. So let's go ahead and let's start that code here. So we're going to do an if overwrite. We're going to do a dash in because we have multiple values here. If it is in Y or yes, we want to do something. Else if the overwrite is in a array with N or no, we want to do something else. And then else, if it equals anything else, we want to tell the user that it is an invalid entry. So let's go ahead and we'll put that right away. The invalid entry here, we're going to say invalid entry, please enter Y to overwrite or N to not overwrite. Now, of course, you could pick any verbiage you really want here. And then in the else if the overwrite is equal to no, we already know what we want to do here. We're just going to do a write output. File path will not be overwritten. And that's all we need. Now, if the overwrite is yes, we do want to write a write output. Path will be overwritten. All right, so we can actually stick with this for now. We're not actually going to overwrite the path just yet. Let's just make sure that this code actually works for what we want to do here. So let's go ahead and let's execute the code. And we can already see that we get our little prompt here. So path exists already in the baseline file. Would you like to overwrite it? And if I put a Q in here, And we go ahead and we look here, invalid entry, please enter Y to overwrite or N to not overwrite. But then it just kind of kept going and it went on to the verify. So let's actually just comment out the verify here so we don't get that extra garbage here. And let's run the script again. If we put N, we get file path will not be overwritten. So that's actually good. And if we put a Y here, we get path will be overwritten. So then it should overwrite. But the part that I don't like is if I don't put a Y or an N, if I put in like a Q or a W, we get invalid entry and then the script just stops. We want to make sure that we kind of keep prompting the user to make sure that they actually have a chance to say yes or no, not just if they enter something incorrectly that the application pretty much to them would seem like it crashes. It doesn't crash, but they wouldn't really know because it doesn't give them the option to overwrite it or not. It doesn't really tell them anything. It just says invalid entry and then it stops. So it definitely seems more like an error here. So what we would actually want to do is put this whole section of the overwrite in a do while loop. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put a do at the top with an open curly bracket here. We're just going to tab, insert all this code, and we're going to do a closing curly bracket, and we're going to put the keyword while, then open and close parentheses, and we're going to say while the overwrite variable is not in, and we're going to say is not in, and we're going to have 4 values here. We're going to have our Y and our yes, and we're going to have our N and our no. So as long as the overwrite is not a Y, yes, and no, it will keep prompting the user for it. So let's go ahead. Let's just test it out to make sure that that actually works exactly as we want to. So we have our prompt here. So let's enter Q. We get invalid entry and we get the prompt again. If we enter W, we get that prompt again. So everything is working. We put Y, then we get path will be overwritten and it exits out of the loop. So that works fine. If we go ahead and we put an N right off the bat, path will the file will not be overwritten and the script stops. So we are good. We don't get stuck in a loop as long as we put in the proper values here. So then the only thing that we're left to do is the actual overwriting. So to overwrite the file path here, what I would do is I would take the current baseline because we know that this is our file. We're actually going to pipe this to a where object. Path is not equal to the target file path. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to actually export that. So export CSV path, and we're going to re-export that to the baseline file path. Once again, with the delimiter of a comma and a no type information here. So now we have our current baseline. So what this line is doing here, it is taking our current baseline, it is removing any entry with the path of the target file path, and then re-exporting that. And then once it's re-exported, all we can actually do is go ahead and copy this code here where we are getting the hash of the file, and then we are inserting that into our file, and we have our entry successfully added into the baseline. So let's go ahead and let's check this out here. So let's just save our code. And we have test 2. So once again, we have a lot of test 2s here. So we should actually only end up with 1. And they start with EF and 1.5. So let's go ahead and let's change once again here. Let's add some entries into test 2. And let's go ahead and let's run the entirety of the code. We're going to get the prompt to overwrite. So let's go ahead and let's put a Y here for yes. And we get path will be overwritten, entry successfully added into the baseline. So if we go look at the baseline here, we will see that it does add some quotations. And this comes from the export CSV commandlet. This does not actually impact the CSV at all. There are ways that you can actually remove these afterwards, or you can normalize it, which we can actually do as well. But this will actually just be, as you can see, now we have our test2 with our new entry here. So if we actually change test2 again, so if we see here, it's 636 is the beginning. So if we go ahead and we run this again, and let's just put a Q here, so it'll prompt us that the invalid entry, and let's say no for the overwrite. So it is still 636, and then if we run it again, and we put a Y for the overwrite, we will see that it is now 347 at the beginning. So everything is actually working correctly here. So the only thing that we would like to do now is just so when you go see the file, there aren't some lines with quotations and some lines without quotations. What I like to do here is actually just at the end of the whole function here is I like to take the current baseline. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another import of the current baseline because we don't want to use the current baseline that was imported up here because we're going to be missing an entry. And then all we're going to do is we're just going to copy this line here so it saves us a little bit of work. And we are just going to actually take that current baseline and actually directly export it. So now if we go ahead and we take a look at this code, we run it. Do we want to overwrite it? No. So the file will not be overwritten. But now what we have is we have quotations all around all of them. If we go ahead and we change the test2 to just 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should see a different than 347. We go ahead and we overwrite that. We go back into it again. Quotations are everywhere now, and we have the 03A. So the file is normalized at least. Every entry now will have quotations on it. And even if we add a brand new file here, so let's add a new file. So if we actually do test3, we're actually going to see something interesting here. Because the file does not exist, because we added that in our last video here. So nothing will have changed in our baseline. So let's go ahead and let's add the file of test3.txt, put 1, 2 in here, and run this code, and we have the entry successfully added in. Here's our entries, and we can actually see that all of them still have that those quotations there. So everything is working great. So if we actually remember our values that we wanted here, when adding a file to the monitor, we want to prompt overwrite to remove the duplicate entries with different hashes. So we've actually accomplished this feature. So in the next video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting in the menu first, and then we're going to be doing an email, and then we're going to be looking at the GUI version of this application. And then you can go ahead and give that application to the people you work with, or use it on your home computer to make sure that certain files never get changed, or at your work for certain files that shouldn't change don't get actually changed. So hopefully this helps you guys out. If you want to see any features again added into this application, please let me know in the comment section down below. If you guys would like to see something done in PowerShell, please let me know in the comment section down below if you guys have any comments or questions. Also, please let me know, and be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also, hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out, and I will see you guys on the next video.